Now, they're going to take jurisdiction anyway. Never seen a traffic court yet that you walked into, and they'll sit there and they'll scratch their heads and go, gosh, well, we're going to proceed anyway. They'll all do that. It's because these lower court judges typically have been out of law school for such a short period of time or never been to law school and don't understand law to begin with, that when you raise subjects such as jurisdiction, they just sit there and go, I don't understand this. I'm a clerk and I've been taking money from all these sheeple walking through here for years, and all of a sudden you're a very strange and bizarre fellow, Mr. Gordon, and you're in here raising questions that we don't understand. That's what it really boils down to. The subject matter here being the free exercise of an inalienable right of any free and natural citizen of these United States. What I'm doing is lawful. I'm just exercising my rights as a free man, and because I'm acting like a free man amongst all these slaves, that makes it look like I'm some kind of a criminal. I drive 80 on my freeway, and that makes me a criminal. In support of the jurisdictional issue, the following briefs are submitted to the court. These are the briefs. Okay, you have your briefs. These, then, are your arguments and authorities. This supports your issue. All I'm telling you here is that this is the way it is. Now I'm going to tell you this is why it's that way. And the Supreme Court is my authority, and they tell me that that's the way it is, and now I'm telling you. That's all it really boils down to. The entirety of jurisdiction, then, when we're talking about it, is simply telling that court that you don't have any cause of action before the bar. An example of that would be, in a civil matter, let's suppose that you filed a complaint against your neighbor, and you allege that he owed you $1,000 for damages, and in that complaint you forgot to put in a paragraph that says, here's what he did. And the judge would say, I'm going to dismiss this complaint, I'm going to dismiss this action, because there is no triable issue before the court. There's no loss. You're telling me all these bad and wicked things that your neighbor has done to you, but you didn't tell me what he did, you didn't tell me how much it cost, you didn't bring me any pictures and show me the ruts in the lawn. So as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing here. And so I'm going to dismiss. And these criminal matters are really civil matters. Do you understand that? You know, really, when you get down to it, we're protecting the claims window of the insurance industry. That's the only thing that we're doing with a traffic law. And it's really a civil matter. You have a contract with the insurance company, which is enforced by the state of Idaho, which is the sovereign master over the insurance company. You gave up your rights and your responsibility at law to the insurance company, and now they're responsible for your actions on the road. And one of the actions on the road that you're prohibited from indulging in is racing or speeding. And so you violated the terms of the contract. Just that simple. You know, you could be a tenant in a house or in your apartment. Just go in and take a look at your contract or your lease agreement. And it says you will not play loud music after 10 o'clock at night, and it says you will not sublet your apartment, and you will not have guests over 7 days. And I mean, there's probably 50 little terms and conditions in there. Let's say that in that contract with your landlord, you agree when you sign that you'll pay $50 damage fee if you violate any of the terms and conditions of that contract. One of the terms and conditions I remember from my old apartment managing days was that you agree that you will not have any guests come in for a period longer than 7 days. And so your Aunt Gertrude comes from Cleveland, and she's staying there in bedroom number 2, and she's there 5 days, and then 6 days, and then the 7th day comes along, and she's supposed to leave and go back to Cleveland, but for whatever reason you decide, and she decides that she's going to stay another week, and the landlord on the 9th or the 10th day comes to you and says, have you got somebody staying in your apartment? Yes. My Aunt Gertrude from Cleveland is here, and she's going back to Cleveland next Saturday. And he says, well, let's see, when did she get here? Well, she got here February 1st, and this is February 10th, and she's going to go back February 14th. Well, and she's been here 10 days. Yeah. Well, your lease agreement says that 7 days is the maximum without written permission from the management. Do you have any written permission? Well, no, but you know, I've lived here in this apartment for 10 years, and I don't see any reason why I have to do this. And that's my home, and that's my castle, and you can't do that. Can he enforce that? Now he goes into small claims court, and he brings in the contract, and you walk in and say, well, yeah, she was there 10 days, but Judge, this is unreasonable. This isn't fair. This is bad. This is, why, I've got rights. And the judge is going to look at you and say, well, you know, you have a right to occupancy pursuant to these terms and conditions. That's the jurisdiction. The terms and conditions of that contract are the jurisdiction. It is the power that the landlord has over you to enforce that contract. Courts have that. Policemen have that. Policemen act within their jurisdiction. And jailers act within their jurisdiction. And landlords act within their jurisdiction. And judges act within their jurisdiction. Make sense? No big mystery. And so the judge says, well, there's a $50 penalty clause in here, and therefore I'm going to award damages of $50 plus court costs to the apartment house because you broke the terms and conditions of the contract. Yeah, that's the way that works. And that's his cause of action. Your voluntary agreement is his cause of action. So you know one of the first things we teach people? Why don't you stop signing contracts? Why don't you try asking people this magic question? What are you going to do to me if I don't sign that? Now, let me illustrate that. I have to break in here because, you know, these subjects, I'm telling you, they're just dull, dry, boring, uninteresting. And if I had to sit here and listen to some fool tell me how jurisdiction and how law works, I'd turn me off. I wouldn't listen to me for a minute. But once in a while there's a funny little story, and these funny little stories will make you money. I got to tell you a story about my little girl. My little girl got a bump on the back of her shoulder blade. And we didn't know what it was, and you know, like any parent, you know, you say, oh, my little girl's sick. I've got to take her to a doctor, right? Well, I'm a strange, foreign, and bizarre fellow. I think that I'm pretty capable when it comes to medicine, when it comes to health and nutrition and diet. And I don't go to medical doctors, and I don't go to hospitals. And now don't condemn me now because I'm crazy and weird and bizarre. I mean, I'm not telling you that you shouldn't go to the hospital or that you shouldn't have health and accident insurance, etc. I don't have any health and accident insurance, and I haven't been to a doctor for 20 years, and I haven't been sick for 20 years, and I don't get colds, and I don't get sick, see? And I don't allow my family to get sick, and my little girl got sick on me, and I'm sitting there, and I'm mad, see? And I had to go to work, and so it was in the afternoon, and I said, well, my government took my nature path and threw him in the penitentiary. And I was really upset about that, and there's a nature path over in Oregon, and I've got to drive about 60 miles now to get to somebody that knows something about health. So I said, well, what did you do, little girl? And she said, well, she was swimming last Wednesday, and the next day she had this soreness in her shoulder, and she didn't know why. And I said, oh, I know. You jumped off the 25-foot board, didn't you? Well, yeah, I did a few times, Daddy. Yeah, and you knocked your shoulder blade out of place. And that's what's wrong with you. So I took her to a chiropractor, and I walked in the office and said, hi, gosh, how you doing today? I think my little girl's got her shoulder blade probably out of kilter. There's something wrong with her, and you can see it swollen up. Took her in the little room over there. He was just astonished. He said, I don't know what that is, mister, but whatever it is, it's really serious. You better take her to the hospital. Well, wait a minute. Hospital? Why would I want to take her to the hospital? Well, she's in pain. And it's obvious that there's something real serious there, and it could be this or that or something else, you know. And, well, about that time I had to go to work, so I said, well, I had a friend with me. I said, friend, would you take her over to the emergency ward of the hospital and ask them what's wrong with her? And so they did. My friend did. He took her over there. And they all shook their head. Wow. And they took her in, and a little later I got off work, and I came tripping over to the hospital. Hi, gosh, how you doing over there? Have you got my little girl in here? Oh, yes, we have, Mr. Gordon. And you're not going to believe this. She is a very sick little girl. Oh, gosh, what's wrong? Well, we don't know. Well, if you don't know what's wrong with her, then how do you know she's a very sick little girl? Well, she has a fever. Oh, okay. Well, now she has a fever. Does she have a cold, flu? No, she has something we don't know. Okay. Well, let me ask you a question. Are you charging me money for this? Can you imagine, you know, here's this nurse standing here. Are you charging me money for keeping her in here? You know, that's like asking the butcher, are you going to charge me for that rump roast that you're wrapping for me? I mean, that's an insane question, isn't it? Hell, it's insane. I want to know if you're charging me money. I want to know if you want something from me for this. Well, of course. Well, how much is it? Well, at this point in time, it's probably about $500, Mr. Gordon. Oh, wait a minute. We have a real problem here. See, I don't have any money and I can't pay you. Therefore, see, I'd already decided I'm going to take my little girl over to Ontario because why? She's been in a hospital for 12 hours and they're telling me we don't know what's wrong with her. I can take her to Ontario in about an hour and 15 minutes and I can take her to a naturopath and he can tell me what's wrong with her in about 30 minutes. And do it for a whole lot less than $500. More like about 50. I'm beginning to get an idea why I don't like hospitals and doctors. So I said, well, I'll tell you what I better do. I'm going to take that little girl home and let her die there. Because I can't afford to let her die here. Oh, you can't take her out of here, Mr. Gordon. That's absolutely impossible. Isn't that funny? Here's your little girl, she's in the hospital, and you're saying, I can't pay you, and I'm going to take her out of here, and no, you can't. How would you like to take your car into a garage, and, you know, here's this mechanic, and he says, well, the bill is about, $500 so far, and we still don't know what's wrong with your car, and we'll let you know when we figure it out. And you say, hold it, stop right there. I can't pay for this, and therefore I'm going to take my car out of here. And he says, no, you don't. You're not going to take your car out of here. We're going to keep your car here until we figure out what's wrong with it, and we're going to charge you $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, whatever it costs. By what authority? Idaho Statute 18-1501 and Idaho Code 16-1616. You see, in our state, your children are the words of the state. You have a marriage contract. I do, anyway. I don't know about you. Maybe you're smarter than I am. I wasn't too smart. When I got married, I was in love. I didn't have any common sense, and I didn't understand the common law. So I went out and got this third-party contract with my government. My government owns my children. I have an equitable interest in them, along with my wife, but my government owns them. And they've passed these laws under the police powers to protect children from cruel and unusual punishment and torment from parents like me. And they compel you to take them to the hospital if they get sick, and I don't blame them. You know, if I had an equitable interest in a cow, and the person who was caring for my cow didn't do too good a job, I'd want to compel him to take that cow to a veterinary or call a veterinarian out there and take care of my equitable interest. And I don't blame the government for doing that, and I understand their position, and they have jurisdiction over my children, and I recognize that. I'm going to do something about that one of these days. And I'm going to get rid of that marriage license and that marriage contract. I didn't get a license from my government to get baptized, fortunately, so I guess my government doesn't control whether I'm going to heaven or hell yet, but I guess it's just a short period of time until they do that. So here's my little girl in the hospital, and I left because this nurse said I couldn't have her, and, you know, this is protecting the state's interest. I was wondering, you know, if they're going to charge me money because I'm obeying the law. See, right then I recognized Idaho Code 18-1501. That could be, you know, child abuse, you know, if I were to take her out of the hospital. And I certainly didn't want to break the law, and I certainly wanted to obey my government because I know that my government knows better for me and for my little girl what's good for us than we do, because after all, we're just dumb slaves and we don't understand medicine, now do it. And so I left her in the hospital, and I came back the next day and I said, have you figured out what's wrong with her yet? No, Mr. Gordon, it's a real mystery, and we put her in isolation, and we don't know if she's got the bubonic plague or the pneumonic plague or whether or not she's got cancer or a heart attack, or when she can't figure it out. But we put her through a CAT scan yesterday, That's a machine that gives you a cross-section type x-ray, and that cost you $1,645, Mr. Gordon. Well, for $1,645, what did we find out? Nothing. She's been in the hospital for 2 days. You spent something like $2,000, and you still don't know what's wrong with it. No, but we're working on it. So I went in the room, and here's my little girl, and she's got tubes all going. You know, she just looked like she'd just gone through World War II, and she'd just been atom bombed or something. I mean, they're just every emergency procedure, you know, to keep her alive. And I'm sitting there going, "Hey, sweetheart, you feeling all right?" "Yeah, I feel fine, Dad." "Still got that lump on your back?" "Yeah." "Does it hurt?" "Well, a little bit." "Do they know what's wrong with you?" "No." This goes on for about 4 or 5 days, see. And by now they're starting to fill her full of snake venom and monkey pus. I don't like that, but my government, you know, is telling me that this is necessary and imperative. They said they thought she had a strep infection in her back, and I'm kind of dumb. I don't know what the hell that means. This nurse said, "You go down, and we want you to fill out and sign some contracts and papers down there, you know, admittance papers and insurance forms, and how are you going to pay this bill?" She's in there 3 days. The bill's up to $2,000 or $3,000. So I go down to the office. Now watch this line. I'm going to show you how to deal with the world in general. I walked into this office, and you know how these hospitals are. I mean, this is a real mausoleum. This is a real temple to Baal. And I sat down, and the high priestess of the hospital came in, and she's got all these forms and papers, and she's talking down to me. They should be like judges. They should be up about 3 steps looking down on me, you know, looking across here. She says, "Mr. Gordon, I have these papers. This is the admittance form, and this is the insurance form, and this is the this form, and this is the that form, and you'll sign this one here and this one here, and you'll do this and you'll do that. And by doing all of this," and I'm just kind of sitting there like this. "Mr. Gordon, do you understand what this is?" No, I don't understand that. Why don't you explain that to me?" "This is the admittance form." "Oh, admittance form. Now, I didn't learn how to read until I was 37 years old, but let me tell you, after I learned how to read, friends, I know how to read. And I know whose jurisdiction I'm in, friends. I'm in this hospital's jurisdiction, and I'm about to sign a contract here. And I looked at this contract, and it agreed to pay all of the bills, and I just agreed to do this and do that, and agreed to do everything. You know, I'm just sitting with all these agreements, and I'm thinking, gosh, I really didn't want to agree to pay this bill, and I really didn't want to agree to submit my little girl to all this, and I really didn't want to agree to all these various things in here. And I told them plainly, I want to take my little girl home. They said, "No, you can't." So I said, "I don't think I want to sign that. There are some things on there that I object to, and I think I'd want to think about that a little bit. Now, what's this one?" She just come unglued. "Mr. Gordon, you have to sign these admission papers." She's been in there about 3 or 4 days now, and I'm sitting here. Wait a minute. What are you going to do to me if I don't sign that? If you don't think the conversation broke down. She got up and went and got a supervisor, and some other Marine type came in there. I thought that lady's going to grab me, you know, and shake me like a rag doll. And she came in there, "What seems to be the problem, Mr. Gordon?" And I don't have any problem that I know of. And I sometimes like to act a little dumb. "Well, Miss Schmidley said that you had some objection or some question to the admittance form, and let me assure you, Mr. Gordon, that this is a standard form that everyone signs. There just simply isn't anything in this form here that's objectionable, and I just can't understand for the life of me why you don't just sign this form here." And I said, "Well, I was just looking at this thing here, and it says here that I agree to pay all of the costs of radiology and tests and x-rays and CAT scans and hospitalization, that I'm going to do that, and I don't have any money, and so therefore I can't pay it because I don't have any money." "Oh, you're indigent." "Indigent? Oh, no, I don't think I'm indigent." "Well, do you have insurance then, Mr. Gordon?" No, I don't have any insurance." "Well, do you have any property or assets?" No, I don't have any property or assets." Well, then you must be indigent. Well, if you want me to be indigent, okay, I'm indigent. Does that make you feel better? Mr. Gordon, this is a serious matter, and you don't have to treat me, like I'm a little kid. As if this old hag isn't treating me like I'm some kind of a little kid, Listen, I can play sandbox like anybody on earth. There isn't anybody can play sandbox better than I can. So she got a little uppity, and she said, well, now you'll qualify if you'll fill out all these papers, and I'll give you this extra form. This is the indigent form. So you fill out this form, and the county will pay the hospital. Oh, see, I didn't know we had socialized medicine in America. I thought that was what they had over there behind the Iron Curtain in England. Yeah, we have socialized medicine in America, and what you do is, if you don't have insurance and they can't steal your house and all of your assets, then they put it off on the taxpayers and let the taxpayers pay it. But they've got the state legislature up here passing laws to grant them the jurisdiction to steal your kid from you. If you don't bring your kid in, they'll steal your kid and put him in a foster home over here because you're a bad nigger, Toby. And for that reason, we're going to take this child away from you. See, Toby is the slave, the hospital is the master. The hospital has jurisdiction in this matter. Beginning to get the drift of what's happening here. And I'm in there, and I'm Toby, and I won't sign these, and I'm saying, Massa, if I don't sign these, what are you going to do to me? Whip me? No, they're not going to whip me. Well, the conversation broke down, and I left, and I came back, and I went up to the 4th floor to visit my little girl, and there was this new nursing supervisor up there, and I said, well, have you figured out what's wrong with my little girl? Yeah, we're pretty sure she has a strep infection, and we think that she's responding to aeromycin and terramycin and penicillin and all the monkey pus and snake venom and all the drugs and all this that we're sticking into her veins, and we think well, when do you think you're going to let her go? Well, have you filled out all the papers? No. Well, if you haven't cleared this with administration, you can't take her out of here. Well, let me see if I understand your position here, sweetheart. Are you telling me that if I don't go down there and sign all those admissions and confessions and contractual agreements and waivers of rights and etc. and volunteer to the jurisdiction of the hospital and agree to sell myself into slavery for the rest of my life, you're going to keep my little girl? That poor nursing supervisor just standing there, mouth dropped about that far, and she's looking at me like, you poor pitiful slob, you ignorant fool. I mean, people like you ought to be sent to school and educated. And all I know is that little girl can't leave here until you have completed the paperwork, Mr. Gordon, and you haven't completed the paperwork. Let me see if I understand this. If I don't fill out this paperwork today, she can't leave today. Is that what you're telling me? That's right. What if I don't get the paper? I could be a pretty dumb fellow. If I don't get that paperwork figured out for a week, are you going to keep her here for a week? I don't know. She can't leave until she's well. And she can't leave until you fill out that paperwork. Well, then, in the time then between today and next week, because of my ignorance, are you going to still charge me this $500 a day? The conversation just breaks down. Can you imagine it? Here I am, I'm dumb and I'm ignorant. I can't fill out this paperwork for a week, and because I can't fill the paperwork out, it's going to cost me another $3,500 because I'm slow. So she said, you have to go down to administration. Does that sound like kindergarten? You have to go to the principal's office. Well, I don't know what happened. I didn't get to the principal's office, and I just left and came back the next day. Miraculously, my little girl was healed within, well, let's say it was 4 in the afternoon. By 10 the next morning, she was just healed. Just nothing in the world wrong with her. Here she is, Mr. Gordon. Get her out of here. Oh, you don't want her anymore? Well, yesterday you told me you were going to keep her forever if I didn't sign those papers. And I don't want to do anything real bad here, and I'm just a little slow and a little dumb, and I don't understand all these papers. See what happened. These people have been using the threat of the police powers of the state to intimidate people, to force and compel them into buying their services, taking people to their hospitals and being subjected to Moloch and to the gods of medicine. And then you sign this voluntary contract. I mean, nobody stuck a gun at my head and said, Gordon, if you don't sign that contract, I'm going to blow your brains all over this office. Nobody did that. Nobody has done that to you or anybody else, and to my knowledge, everybody that goes in there is just intimidated by this overwhelming judicial palladium. And, oh yes, okay, I'll sign. Is that the right way to sign that? And what else do you want me to sign? Oh, is this the way? Shall I put my middle name in here too? Oh yes, and shall I put my address and phone number down? And see what's happening to people. You see how they lose jurisdiction? They lost jurisdiction, and now it's a violation. It's a penal statute, and it's a violation now not to pay this hospital the agreed upon amount. And now who's going to determine what the amount is? Is this buyer and seller determining the terms of the contract? No, it's the hospital just telling you this is it, sign here, we'll fill in the blanks, don't read the fine print. If you think that's an exaggeration, just go take a look at some of those hospital contracts. I dare you to. Go over to your local hospital and tell them you want an admittance form. You want to see a payment form, and start reading it. And if you've got any ability at all to read words and put definitions together and look at the confessions and admissions you're making and look at how you volunteer to confess that you owe all the money and you're going to sign this thing before anybody ever fills it out. And so here, as I said earlier, are these two young fellows making all these admissions and confessions to this judge. The judge hasn't passed sentence yet. The judge hasn't said, I'm going to put you in jail for 5 years or 14 years or 28 years. He hasn't said a thing. You make all these admissions and confessions, you make all these signatures on here, waive all of your rights, and when I've got total and absolute dominion and control over you, when I own you body and soul, I'll then let you know what it is you're going to have to specifically perform for me. And that's exactly the way the hospitals work. And that's the way the courts work. And it's the way the police work. And it's been working that way for so long upon so many people that people of and by themselves are not able to walk into the traffic court and say, hold it, before I confess, I'd like to know what kind of jeopardy I'm in. How many times do people walk into a courtroom and say, hold it, I have some administrative and procedural matters here. You know, I did this the other day in front of the court and the poor judge couldn't tell me what the penalty was. He didn't know. I'm not kidding, it took him 15 minutes to figure out what the penalty was. And it worked like this. I walked in and said, well, let's see, I have some administrative and procedural matters, Your Honor. And this guy's no dummy, he's been on the bench for a long time. And he said, yes, Mr. Gordon, go ahead. Well, Your Honor, I'd like to determine what kind of jeopardy I'm in before we move forward into a pleading. Can't go into the arraignment until I know. Well, what is it you want to know? I'd like to know whether or not this is an indictable misdemeanor or an ordinary misdemeanor. Just blew him right out of the saddle. Gosh, I don't know. Well, would you look it up? I'd like to know what we're doing here. And he looked and went through the books and studied for a while. He said, well, Mr. Gordon, it would appear that this is an indictable misdemeanor because of the penalty, a $5,000 fine and 1 year in jail. It would appear to be an indictable misdemeanor. Oh, well, if it's well, but wait a minute, Mr. Gordon. Let's check this out. And he checked a little more, and he looked and said, well, it appears that the legislature has amended this law and that it's an ordinary misdemeanor. Well, okay, Judge, you tell me what it is, and then I'll tell you how we're going to proceed. Well, Mr. Gordon, we need to get this arraignment over with, and how can we get the arraignment over with until we know whether it's an indictable misdemeanor or an ordinary misdemeanor? Maybe it's a felony. Does anybody know if this is a felony? See, I'd already looked through the books, and I couldn't determine myself whether or not it was an indictable misdemeanor or a felony or an ordinary misdemeanor, because the law here in this state pursuant to this obstructing and delaying an officer is vague and ambiguous. We can't show a crime, we can't show a cause of action at bar, and it's a penal statute, and I don't know where the contract is, and I'm asking the judge, where's the contract? What did I sign? Maybe I signed something. Maybe you do have jurisdiction. But if you do, I want to see what it was I signed that granted you that jurisdiction. Here's the judge. He's looking through. Well, Mr. Gordon, I'm going to proceed upon the assumption that it's an ordinary misdemeanor, to which I have, replied, I am not going to plead to an assumption. And I want to know what we're doing here, and I want to know the facts. Well, Mr. Gordon, the record will show that this is an ordinary misdemeanor. Okay, well then let's stipulate. See, I'm in the process of making a contract. Let's stipulate to this then, Your Honor. If this is an ordinary misdemeanor with a penalty of a maximum of 6 months imprisonment and a $300 fine, and if the prosecutor over here does not amend this exact complaint, then it would appear that this court is the court of proper and original jurisdiction under Title 19 in this matter. If that is the case, and providing that the prosecutor does not amend this complaint, and providing this court will stipulate that this is an ordinary misdemeanor, I plead not guilty. If, however, this is an indictable misdemeanor, or we find out later that the prosecutor is going to amend the complaint, then let the record clearly show that I do not plead and I stand mute. Now, you see how you do that? I'm dictating the terms of the contract. You people determine whether or not you want to accept them. And if the judge says, well, that's totally unacceptable and I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, then he doesn't have my permission, does he? And if he doesn't have my permission, he doesn't have jurisdiction over me in personam. You see, personal jurisdiction in equity has to come from the voluntary agreement of the two parties. And that's where you are in the traffic court. That's where you are in small claims. Let's analyze small claims for a moment. You go into the small claims court, there's no court of record. This guy has sued you. Let's develop a hypothetical circumstance here. You rented an apartment, and you made an agreement with the landlord that if he would put carpet in the front room, you'd pay $300 a month. You pay $300 a month for 2 months, and he doesn't put the carpet in. You get after him, and you say, put the carpet in. He says, I will. You don't pay him the rent. He gets mad in the third month, and he hauls you into small claims court and sues you for $300 because you didn't pay the rent. You go into small claims court, and here's the way the scenario comes down. You get a complaint, and then you appear at the time and place set certain. And when you walk in that door, you have granted that court jurisdiction over your person. Then they walk in and you sit down, and now they have jurisdiction over the geography because it's in the county. Now they have jurisdiction over you in personam because you voluntarily walked in. And then they read the complaint to you and you say, not guilty, and now they have jurisdiction. This judge has jurisdiction over the subject matter of whether or not rent is owed. You see now how jurisdiction works in the small claims court? It works by contract. It works by voluntary appearance. It works by bail. It works by the two parties going in and submitting themselves voluntarily to binding arbitration. That's all small claims is, and that's all the traffic court is. It's binding arbitration. So when you walk into one of those type courts, especially if they have the habit of putting people in prison, because the persons who go to prison, let's say, or that they're putting in prison, or the people who don't obey the dictates of the traffic court, then what you do is make a voluntary, not a voluntary appearance, but a special appearance. You walk in and say, Your Honor, I'm here under threat, duress, and coercion. I know that if I didn't appear here today, you'd take some of my life, liberty, and property. You might want to avoid the word steal, although that's what it really boils down to. Because, you see, most people don't understand jurisdiction, and they walk into the small claims court, and they think this is a lawful court, a court of law. This is a law court provided by our Constitution. Nothing could be further from the truth. That's a court that's instituted called a Star Chamber proceeding that our founding fathers found so repugnant that they started throwing tea in the harbor in Boston. And we have those same Star Chamber proceedings in the good old U.S. of A., And we've had them here since, I don't know when, probably 20 years after the Revolution. We started putting in courts to administer private mercantile equity. How do you handle contracts between companies? There's private mercantile equity. That's the old law merchant from the Hanseatic League. That's where these law merchant, in other words, these merchants under the Roman civil law would come to an arbitrator to simply decide the terms of the contract. Who's right here? Because they need a rapid method by which, or a fast method to adjudicate matters so we can get on to making money. The common law is very slow and laborious. It takes forever. So when you have a divorce, when you got the marriage contract, you've already made provisions for the judicial tribunal that's going to hear the divorce proceedings. Did you know that? Yeah, you're not going to have any common law proceedings. It's going to be an administrative proceeding. You're just going to walk into the court and the judge is going to decide who gets the kids and who gets the house and who gets the car and etc. There's no jury involved in a divorce. Now, once in a while, there's a real wild and bizarre case that'll come up, like Lee Marvin. There's a common law marriage, and they call it palimony, and it is so strange and bizarre in our system of law today. Now, that wasn't strange and bizarre in 1790 or 1820, but today, because we've drifted so far from our common law, we don't recognize it anymore, that the newspapers and the lawyers from the law schools and the judges say, wow, gosh, there's a divorce that's got a 12-man jury, and here's this woman lived with this guy for umpteen years, and my goodness, if they had a marriage contract, if they had a marriage license, they wouldn't have all that problem, would they? They'd just go into a judge and he'd say, Mr. Marvin. See, Mr. Marvin thought that what he would do is he'd beat the common law, and that he would just live with this woman for a while, and when he got tired of her, he'd throw her off like an old rag, and she couldn't do anything about it. Well, she had rights under the common law to sue him. She was as much a wife as if they'd have gone out here to a preacher. So there was what you saw there wasn't something strange and bizarre. You saw a common law divorce. That's what you saw, and that's why I said, now how many of those do you know of? Well, there's one once in a while, and it usually brings up some real headlines when it occurs. But every time you look at that, you're looking at jurisdiction, and you're looking at the capacity of the entity, the hospital, the traffic court, the landlord in your apartment house. They all have jurisdictional boundaries. And the jurisdiction that's conferred or used or placed upon you came from you. Remember, all of the evidence that's ever going to be used against you is going to be furnished by you. All of the jurisdiction that's going to be used against you is going to be provided by you. It's either by the contracts you're signing, or it's based upon the common law.